On a stormy prairie night, a man's past comes riding back, but what he discovers could change everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and second chances. Will forgiveness arrive before the storm closes in? Watch as a friendship turns into something more, somewhere between friendship and forever. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt story. If it moved you, please like, share it, comments below, and let someone know. You are never alone. The prairie wind brushed against my face that evening. Dry grass whispered across the endless frontier. The sky glowed with the last gold of sunset, and beside me walked Elena, the one person who understood every quiet ache inside my heart. Our friendship began in a season of hardship. A burned farm. An empty pocket. A heart heavy with memories that followed me like shadows across the plains. Elena carried her own quiet storms. Yet her smile held warmth, the kind that softened the rough edges of a hard world. We built small days together, fixing fences, sharing bread by the fire, watching distant mountains turn purple under evening light. Somewhere between laughter and silence, something deeper began to grow. A feeling gentle as spring rain, strong as the wide land beneath our boots. That evening the wind shifted suddenly. Cold, sharp. My breath slowed. The smell of distant rain drifted through the air, rich soil and wild sage filling my senses. Elena stopped walking. Her hand brushed against mine. Warm, steady. The contact sent a quiet shock through my chest, as if the entire prairie paused to listen. My heart pounded louder than the restless wind. In her eyes lived kindness, patience, and a depth of understanding that felt almost sacred. A look that carried every shared sunrise, every moment of quiet healing between us. The horizon darkened slowly. Clouds gathered like heavy thoughts across the sky. Thunder murmured far away. Elena stepped closer, close enough for me to feel the warmth of her breath in the cooling air. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of wind, the scent of rain, and the steady rhythm of two hearts standing on the edge of something vast. Her fingers tightened around mine, a silent promise forming in the growing storm. Somewhere between friendship and forever, a fragile truth trembled in that moment. And the prairie held its breath as Elena looked into my eyes and began to speak. Her voice arrived softer than the wind moving through the tall prairie grass. "Every mile across this land carried a memory of you," she said. The words settled inside my chest like warm fire on a cold frontier night. The air smelled of rain and distant pine. Clouds rolled slowly above us, heavy and restless. My pulse echoed in my ears. For a moment, the entire world felt suspended between heartbeat and breath. Elena stepped closer. Her coat brushed against my arm. A faint scent of lavender, and with smoke drifted through the cool air. So familiar. So comforting. Yet something inside me trembled with sudden uncertainty. The wind rose again, sweeping dust across the path. Grass bent low as if the prairie itself listened to our silence. "Elena," I whispered, my voice rough with emotion. "This land taught me endurance, yet you taught me something greater." Her eyes shimmered in the fading light. Kind eyes. Brave eyes. Eyes that carried patience through every broken season of my life. A distant crack of thunder rolled across the plains. The sky darkened deeper blue. Rain began to fall in scattered drops against the dry earth. Each drop released the rich scent of soil rising into the air. Elena reached for my hand again. This time her grip held quiet determination. Warmth flowed through my fingers like life returning to frozen ground. Then her expression shifted. A sudden tension crossed her face. Her gaze drifted past my shoulder toward the empty trail stretching across the prairie. I turned slowly. The wind carried a strange sound through the tall grass. Hoofbeats. Distant. Approaching. My chest tightened as the rhythm grew louder against the open land. Elena's hand gripped mine harder now. The approaching riders cut dark shapes against the lightning flashing along the horizon. Rain thickened around us, cold against my skin. And in that uneasy moment between thunder and hoofbeats, Elena leaned closer and whispered something that made my breath catch inside my chest. "They came back," she whispered. The words moved through me like sudden ice. Rain slid down my face. The prairie wind carried the steady rhythm of hoofbeats across the darkening land. Closer now. Heavy. Unhurried. The scent of wet earth rose stronger with every breath I took. Lightning flashed along the horizon. For a brief second the riders appeared clearly. 3 silhouettes. Wide hats. Long coats moving with the wind. My stomach tightened. Old memories stirred like restless dust inside my mind. Years earlier, I had ridden across these same plains with men who lived by harsh choices and empty promises. A life I left behind. A life Elena helped me escape. Her hand still held mine, yet a faint tremble moved through her fingers. The rain soaked our clothes. Cold drops slid along my neck. The riders slowed as they reached the rise above the trail. One horse snorted into the wind. Another stamped against the wet ground. Their leader leaned forward in the saddle. Lightning cracked again. His face appeared for the briefest moment. Recognition struck me like thunder inside my chest. A man from the past I buried beneath years of honest work and quiet redemption. My breath turned shallow. The prairie seemed to shrink around us. Elena stepped closer until her shoulder pressed against mine. Her warmth steadied the storm inside my chest. The riders began descending the slope. Slow. Certain. Rain tapped against the dry wooden fence beside the trail. The smell of leather and wet horses drifted toward us. One rider called out across the wind. My name. The sound echoed over the open land like an old door forced open again. Elena looked up at me. Concern lived in her eyes, yet something stronger burned beneath it. Trust. Quiet courage. Thunder rolled across the plains again. The riders stopped only a few yards away. Their horses shifted restlessly in the rain. Water dripped from the brim of the leader's hat as he studied me with a long, silent stare. Then his slow smile appeared through the storm. And he spoke words that made the prairie air feel suddenly heavy around my lungs. "You look different," he said slowly. Rain streamed from the brim of his hat. His voice carried the rough edge of old roads and harder years. The prairie wind pulled at his coat while his horse shifted beneath him. I stepped forward instinctively. Elena's hand remained in mine, steady and warm against the cold rain. "Years change a man," I answered, my voice calm though my chest felt tight. Lightning flashed again across the plains. For a brief moment his face lit clear in the storm. Scar along his jaw. Same hard eyes. The past stood alive in front of me. Behind him, the other riders waited silently, their horses breathing clouds into the damp air. The smell of wet leather and mud drifted closer. Thunder rolled deeper now. Elena's fingers tightened around mine again. I felt her courage like quiet strength flowing into my own bones. The man leaned slightly forward in the saddle. His eyes moved toward Elena. A slow curiosity crossed his face. "Well now," he murmured. His gaze returned to me. "So this is the life you chose." His words carried neither anger nor warmth. Only a strange weight that hung between us like the thick clouds above. Rain fell harder. Cold drops struck the wooden fence beside the trail with sharp rhythm. The prairie grass bent low beneath the wind. I felt every breath Elena took beside me. Calm. Measured. A reminder that kindness still existed even when old shadows returned. The rider slowly swung one leg over his saddle and stepped down into the wet earth. His boots sank slightly into the mud. He walked toward us with unhurried steps. Each step pressed deeper into the silence surrounding the three of us. The storm light flickered again across the prairie. His shadow stretched across the ground until it reached my boots. He stopped only a few feet away. close enough for me to see the years written across his face, close enough for him to see the life I built far from the man I once was. For a long moment, he simply studied me. Then his eyes moved again toward Elena standing beside me, and with quiet curiosity, he asked a question that made the air feel suddenly thinner around us. "Does she know who you used to be?" The question fell between us like a stone into still water. Rain softened into a steady whisper across the prairie. Elena's hand stayed wrapped in mine. Warm. Certain. I felt her thumb move slightly against my palm, a quiet reassurance that steadied the storm inside my chest. The man watched us carefully. His boots rested deep in the wet soil. Behind him the horses shifted, their breath rising in pale clouds against the dark evening air. Lightning flickered again along the distant horizon. For a moment, the prairie stretched endless and silver beneath the storm. "Yes," Elena answered before I could speak. Her voice carried calm strength. No hesitation. No fear. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. He studied her as if measuring the weight of those words. "And you stayed?" he said slowly. Elena nodded. The rain slid through loose strands of her hair. "I saw the man standing here," she said gently. "Not the man who walked those older roads." Her words settled into the quiet space between thunder and wind. Something inside my chest loosened. A long breath escaped me. The rider's gaze shifted back toward me. For the first time, his expression softened slightly. The prairie wind moved through the tall grass around us, carrying the scent of rain and wild sage. "You always carried more heart than the rest of us," he said quietly. "Even back then." His voice held a strange mixture of memory and regret. Behind him one of the riders adjusted in the saddle, the leather creaking softly. The storm clouds drifted lower across the dark sky. The man looked once more toward Elena. Curiosity lingered in his eyes. Then he turned back to me and stepped even closer, his voice dropping lower so the wind almost swallowed the words. "There is a reason we searched these plains for you tonight." My pulse quickened. Rain tapped faster against the ground around our boots. Elena's grip tightened slightly again. The man leaned closer, water dripping from his hat brim, and began to explain something that made the prairie night suddenly feel far more dangerous than the gathering storm. "The land office in town opened an old ledger this morning," he said quietly. Rain tapped against his coat. Thunder murmured far across the plains. His eyes stayed locked on mine. "A ledger with names from years ago." Cold air moved through my lungs. The prairie suddenly felt smaller. Elena shifted closer beside me, her shoulder touching mine. The warmth of her presence held me steady while the storm gathered above us. "What names?" I asked slowly. The man wiped rain from his brow. His voice dropped even lower. "Men who rode together once, men who vanished after the railroad payroll disappeared." The wind pushed through the tall grass with a restless hiss. Lightning flashed again, bright enough to turn the wet prairie silver. For a heartbeat none of us spoke. I heard only the steady breath of horses and the distant rumble of thunder. "That life ended years ago," I said firmly. The man studied my face with careful patience. "I believe that," he replied. His tone carried quiet honesty. "Yet the law sees ink on a page, not the road a man walks after." Behind him one of the riders shifted uneasily. Leather creaked. A horse stamped its hoof into the mud. Rain slid down the wooden fence beside us. Elena's fingers tightened slightly around mine again. I felt her courage like steady light inside the dark moment. The man glanced toward her once more. Respect flickered briefly in his eyes. "She stands beside you even with this storm rising," he said. Elena lifted her chin calmly. "People deserve the chance to build something better," she answered softly. The wind carried her words across the wet prairie grass. The rider nodded once, thoughtful. Then he turned his gaze back toward the dark trail behind him. The sheriff rides this direction tonight, he said quietly. My pulse thudded once against my ribs. Rain fell heavier now. The prairie smelled rich with wet soil and sage. The man stepped closer again, lowering his voice so only Elena and I could hear. There may still be a narrow road through this, he murmured. Lightning cracked across the sky again, and in that sharp white flash, he began to tell me something about the ledger, something hidden in those pages, something that could change everything standing on this stormy frontier night. A page torn halfway from the ledger, he murmured. Rain dripped steadily from the brim of his hat. Thunder rolled again across the distant hills. My breath slowed as I listened. A name scratched out, he continued. Your name. The words landed heavy inside my chest. Elena's hand tightened gently around mine. Warm. Steady. The prairie wind carried the scent of wet grass and dark soil between us. Someone removed it before the sheriff saw the book, the man said. Lightning flickered again, revealing the deep lines across his face. Someone who believed the man you became deserved more than chains. For a moment the rain softened. The silence stretched across the open land like a held breath. Who did it? I asked quietly. The rider looked past me toward the distant glow of town lights barely visible through the storm. The clerk refused to speak, he replied. His voice carried a thoughtful weight. Yet he mentioned a woman who came asking questions earlier today. Elena shifted beside me. I felt her body grow still. Rain slid slowly along the sleeves of her coat. The man's gaze moved toward her again. A quiet understanding formed in his expression. You rode to town this morning, he said gently. Elena met his eyes without hesitation. Yes. The simple word hung between thunder and wind. My chest tightened with sudden emotion. She had carried this burden alone through the day, through the long walk back across the prairie, through the moment we stood together beneath the storm. I wanted to protect the life you built, she said softly. Her voice trembled only slightly, yet her eyes remained strong. Lightning flared again, bright across the soaked grassland. For an instant the entire frontier seemed carved from silver light. The rider nodded slowly, a hint of respect touching his tired features. A brave choice, he said quietly. Behind him, the other riders shifted in their saddles. Far down the trail another sound began to rise through the wind, different from the earlier hoofbeats. Faster, sharpened by urgency. The man turned his head toward the sound. Rain thickened again around us. His voice lowered once more as he leaned closer. The sheriff arrived sooner than expected, he said. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder across the wet prairie. Elena's fingers wrapped tighter around mine. And as the distant lantern light began flickering through the storm, the rider spoke quickly, revealing one final detail about that torn ledger page. The rider's voice softened beneath the rain. That torn page carried one more mark, he said. Lightning flickered across the prairie. For the first time, your name stood beside a word written in different ink. My chest tightened. What word? I asked quietly. He looked toward Elena, then back at me. Forgiven. The storm seemed to pause for a breath. Rain slowed to a gentle whisper over the tall grass. Elena's hand trembled slightly in mine, yet her eyes shone with calm courage. In the distance, the sheriff's lantern moved closer along the dark trail, a warm glow swinging through the rain. The rider stepped back toward his horse. I told the clerk a simple truth, he said. A man who builds fences, shares bread, and protects a good heart beside him already paid his debts. Thunder rumbled far away. The prairie stretched wide and quiet beneath the clouds. The approaching hoofbeats slowed. Lantern light grew brighter through the falling rain. Elena turned toward me then. Her eyes carried the same kindness that once found me standing alone in the dust of a broken past. You walked a hard road, she said softly. but every step forward shaped the man standing here. Warmth spread through my chest stronger than the cold storm around us. The sheriff rode closer and stopped near the fence. His calm gaze moved between us. The wind carried the scent of rain and fresh earth across the land. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded once, slowly. Some burdens fade when a person chooses honesty, patience, and the quiet courage to become better than yesterday. The prairie night softened as the storm began to pass. And standing there beside Elena, I finally understood a simple truth the frontier teaches every wandering soul. A person's past writes the first chapters of life. Yet kindness, redemption, and love always hold the pen for the ending.